Hello and welcome. How stable is Iraq, and what does the Obama administration risk by not focusing more closely on its future? Ever since the US announced plans to withdraw combat forces from the country, Iraq has essentially dropped out of the headlines. But recent developments worry Iraqis that the current political void will soon be followed by a security void. 2 months after elections, the main political parties are no closer to forming a government. Some progress has been made towards ratifying the results of the vote, but the negotiations over the next prime minister might take weeks, if not months. Iraqis are concerned that if either Sunni or Shia groups feel left out of the political process, sectarian tensions will rise again. Meanwhile, attacks believed to be carried out by Al-Qaeda have increased, killing more than 100 people in the most recent wave of violence. Last month, the group's top 2 leaders were killed in a joint US-Iraqi operation, but that has not slowed down the bloodshed. By the end of August, tens of thousands of American troops will have pulled out, leaving 50,000 confined to their bases without congressional authorization to fight. And the role of these so-called advise and assist brigades remains to be seen. So today we ask, what will it take for Iraq to build a stable future, and how will America's military strategy affect it? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we'll also welcome your phone calls onto the show. To discuss the issues, I'm joined by Dr. Ali Alawi, Iraq's former Minister of Defense, who has also held the trade and finance portfolios. Dr. Alawi is the author of The Occupation of Iraq, Winning the War, Losing the Peace, which discusses Iraq's descent into chaos, and it's equally critical of the Americans and fellow Iraqis. His most recent work is The Crisis of Islamic Civilization, which looks into the imperial expansion of the West into Muslim lands and the globalization and rise of political Islam that have accompanied it. He's joining us from London. Dr. Alawi, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Riz.
Sir, first of all, what do you think it's going to take to end this post-election political impasse where we just don't seem to have any progress being made? Is it going to be a repeat of the 2005 election where it took about 150 days to get some sort of government?
Well, I mean, certainly it seems that way. I've just come back from Baghdad, and it is only, I'm afraid, the beginning of a long process that will obviously end up with a prime minister, but it can take anything up to several months for this to be realized. It's a long, complex process, but there's slow progress in that direction.
So what's been the greatest difficulty in finding some kind of power-sharing deal?
Well, it's not so much power-sharing deal, it's that the way that the elections were held, I mean, it came about with about the same outcomes as we had before. It was basically an ethno-sectarian vote, but that was repackaged with different political groupings and different personalities. So unless this is sorted out, unless you are able to have a common issues-based political culture in Iraq, as long as ethno-sectarianism is going to be the basis for determining the political landscape of the country, then it's going to be quite difficult to clobber together coalitions that are going to be both productive and stable.
Did you get any sense that the West simply pushed for elections in order to try and find some kind of closure on Iraq prior to the troop withdrawal?
I mean, no, because elections were held according to certain constitutional requirements. This may have been true in 2005 when the elections were first mooted, but these elections were due to a constitutional requirements to hold elections, and they were within the terms of the constitutional agreement that was reached in 2005. The West, I think, has a very small part to play in the ongoing political drama inside Iraq, in contrast to what it was, say, in 2004 and 2005.
There's a sense that Iraq has really been shifted out of the headlines. Of course, the focus, as far as America is concerned, is Afghanistan, and Iraq seems to be taking the backseat now. Is there a sense, perhaps, that the West is wiping its hands of Iraq? That it's basically, we're locking the door and just leaving the key behind?
Well, again, it's not so much the West. I mean, I would focus my arguments on the United States in particular, which has carried by far the biggest burden in terms of trying to pacify Iraq or to stabilize the country. And because it has taken such a long and tortuous road before we got to the point of quasi-stability, the main interest of the United States has been really twofold. One is to ensure that the state structures of Iraq don't collapse as a result of either internal or external threats. And secondly, to make sure that Al-Qaeda does not re-emerge in Iraq and establish a base of operations that will not only destabilize the country but destabilize the region. And I think in both cases sort of a minimum has been achieved whereby they could basically claim a type of victory and leave. But it is not, I don't see the United States re-engaging with Iraq on the same terms and conditions as they did, say, between the 2003 to 2006 or 2007 period. Things have changed dramatically since then.
Now, wondering with the situation following the election, the sort of vacuum that exists, how much is that allowing differences to grow among the sort of various sectarian groups there? How much is it allowing the sectarian divisions to be enhanced?
Well, the sectarian divisions, I'm afraid, are the reality of Iraqi politics. No matter what platitudes are used by politicians to claim that they are non-sectarian or they have a non-sectarian political base, the fact of the matter remains that the vast majority of Iraqis voted along ethno-sectarian considerations. And we have to accept that as being the ground rules of Iraqi politics until and unless the political culture matures, whereby you can have an issues-based political environment rather than one that's based on these rather basic loyalties and identities. So it will continue the way it did in the past. We have to have a Shia prime minister, whether it is explicitly stated or not. We are probably going to have a Kurdish president, and we are very likely to have a Arab Sunni head of parliament. And as long as this is the format in which political power is distributed in the country, together with a kind of spoils-based ministerial system, then it will take some time before the haggling gets to the point where we have a new government.
Let me put a couple of emails to you, please, Dr. Alawi. We have one from Mahabir Sharma, who wrote into our Facebook page saying, democracy in Islamic countries will not work. Sharia law is the only option for Iraq. Can I get your view on that, please?
I think democracy in the terms of adversarial politics through political parties in a highly charged and divided society is obviously not a recipe for long-term success. But I think the idea of having a representative government that is accountable, that is responsible, that is effective, if that is what we mean by democracy, then I think it is something that every nation and every people should have as a matter of right. Whether it's expressed in the form of a Sharia-based constitutional order or not is really, in my mind, immaterial. What you need to have is representative, accountable, transparent, and open government. With the form it takes is really not so important as far as I'm concerned.
Another email here, sir. This one came from Somalia. If I can put this to you, from Ali Nasser Abdurrahman, who wrote in saying, the Obama administration is in a dilemma. Keeping the US troops in Iraq after the deadline will weaken the president's ability to fulfill his promises in the country. However, by sticking to the deadline, Mr. Obama is leaving the Iraqi people in the lurch.
This is not really true, because Iraqi security forces have grown enormously in the last few years. We now have nearly 1 million people in the army, in the security services, in the intelligence services, in the police. In fact, the security services in Iraq are probably larger than they were in the days of Saddam. So we have a very large national security apparatus and military apparatus that theoretically at least can maintain peace and order and can push away any serious challenges to the state. It may not be able to pacify or stabilize the country completely at all times and all places, but it is large enough, I think, to see off any serious insurrection or localized uprising.
Have those issues, Dr. Alawi, that were raised before about the Iraqi forces, issues of recruitment, the issues of resources and training, have those all been addressed fairly comprehensively in your opinion then?
Well, they've been addressed, but the outcome is not necessarily 100% satisfactory. Equipment still is a problem, and the command structure is a problem in the sense that there are still divided loyalties. Divisions within, again, ethno-sectarian divisions go down to brigade and battalion levels. These are issues that are not likely to go away in the short term. But in terms of the training of the Iraqi army, it's vastly improved from what it was a few years ago. There is a reasonably effective command structure, but it is not fully integrated yet into the political process. And it's not clear whether in fact they would take orders from the political establishment if there are extreme tensions inside the country which divide society into its ethno-sectarian components. These issues are still, I think, not yet resolved. And the army in particular needs more time before it can cohere as a fighting force.
On that point, and it touches on something we've already spoken about, let me squeeze in another email before we take a break. Emmanuel Naleche has written in saying, the planned withdrawal will cause even more violence in the region. By extending the deadline, the US could help the Iraqi people to help themselves, which is the core element of a sustainable peace solution in the region.
Again, this is a one-sided way of looking at it. You have to also look at the Iraqi perspective, and you have to respect the Iraqi point of view. There are very, very few people who want to see a continuing US military presence in Iraq, not least the government itself, which has entered into the so-called SOFA agreement, the Status of Forces Agreements, which is a kind of treaty whereby the United States is obliged to draw down its troops. There are no great supporters, apart from perhaps the Kurds, for a continuing American military presence. And in some ways, if it overstays its welcome, it can turn against its own interests. So I don't really buy the argument that the withdrawal of the United States in the short term is going to lead to a kind of implosion in the country. I don't think it's on that argument.
Well, sir, I'm going to ask you some more questions. We're going to take a very short break here. More of our discussion with Dr. Alawi in a moment. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Lingering political uncertainty in Iraq threatens the safety and security of the people there. As tensions continue to rise, we examine the impact of America's planned troop withdrawal. Discussing the issues, we have Dr. Ali Alawi, who has served in Iraq as a defense, finance and trade minister. He's joining us from London. Dr. Alawi, just before the break, you were talking about the fact that a lot of people in Iraq don't want to see Americans continuing there as sort of occupying force as such, and perhaps that's a reason many of them have been targets. I wonder, with the remaining troop presence, once the withdrawal is complete later in the year, the 50,000 or so troops remaining, to what degree will they be a target, a focus for any of the insurgents to say, well, look, they're still an occupying force?
I don't think that would be the case, because they'll be established on bases that are quite far from any urban areas. In fact, the way it's looking is that there's going to be one or two bases where they'll be located in the western parts of Iraq, Anbar province, and perhaps one or two bases with maybe up to 10,000 people in the southern parts of the country, and one perhaps up north. So they're going to be far from major population areas, and their visibility is going to be very, very small. And I suppose when they move around, they're going to move around at night, so that their impact in terms of their felt presence is going to be quite small. These were one of the conditions, I think, behind the Status of Forces Agreement, so that the remaining troops would not necessarily be combat troops, but will be involved more in terms of support, training, logistics. So they'll be attached to other Iraqi army units rather than be involved in either combat or peacekeeping roles. So I think that they would not come into daily contact, as it were, with the population. In fact, this has been the case for some time now. For the last year or year and a half, American forces are not that visible in the major urban areas of Iraq.
Now, despite that visibility, they've still been very much an integral part of the way the country's been functioning. And I wondered to what degree, with that extended presence for so long now, and the size of the presence of America and other nationals there, to what degree has Iraq become dependent on the American presence in a number of ways?
Well, I think if you look at it strictly in terms of combat operations, then that has been on a declining curve. But you must understand that the American presence is not just the presence of the US military. There are a huge number of military contractors, people who are in fact civilians but work for the Pentagon. And we're talking about those, the numbers might be anywhere up to 100,000 people. And these numbers might increase. So there'll be a shift of emphasis from visible combat troops with their gear and so on to people who may not necessarily be seen or noticed as part of the American military effort. It is these people who are going to do a lot of the support, the logistical support, the advisory roles that are still very, very important for the functioning not only of the security apparatus in Iraq, but also some significant parts of the administration. But rather than the Americans doing it through their army or through their military, it will be done through civilian contractors whose role might not necessarily be that obvious to the average person.
That's really what that's what I was referring
involvement
to.
In the
I'm sorry, yeah, that's what I was referring to. And to what degree does this become an open door for contractors?
Well, it is. I mean, that's, I'm afraid, is the face of modern warfare. We have for every combat troop something like 2 or 3 military contractors, and it is these people who have been doing nearly all the non-combat work. And in time, I'm sure they'll end up as being involved also as mercenaries in combat work, but maybe not in this war. So this is the nature in which the advice and support is being given. But it is not as significant overall as it was in the early days, say between 2003 and 2006. A lot of the Iraqi ministries are not happy in seeing large number of advisors and contractors running around. And in fact, their advice is becoming less and less taken into account. But in certain areas, they are still significant. Okay.
We have an email here that came in from Italy, if I can put to you, from Luciana de Floriano, who says, to what extent does the interference of neighboring countries in Iraqi politics worry the White House? And is this also a reason for the US to delay its troop withdrawal? I guess the reference there is specifically with Iran, and what impact Iran, the sort of, if Nouri al-Maliki and the Shia coalition takes a greater control, what impact that will have on Iran's influence in Iraq?
Well, Iran's influence in Iraq is, I must say, wide, pervasive, and deep, and it affects nearly every aspect of Iraqi life and society, including the government. There are political parties who are in one way or another related to Iran. There are political leaders who, some of them owe their allegiance to Iran, others are partial to Iran. But this is also true for the involvement of other countries, unfortunately, in the internal affairs of Iraq. Both Syria, in a less obvious way, Saudi Arabia, and certainly Turkey are now becoming important players inside the Iraqi domestic scene. So Iran, although it has by far the largest footprint, as it were, in Iraq, the other parties are no less important in terms of their involvement. And in the recent elections, for example, the role of Turkey was really quite obvious in the northern provinces. So in the absence of any effective government or a government that has widespread popular support and is effective and responsible, Iraq will always be a playground for all kinds of external forces, not least Iran. And unless we do something about having an accountable and responsible government, this will continue for a long time to come.
We got an email that just came in.
The Obama administration is certainly concerned about Iran.
Thank you. I'm going to put an email that just came in from Kenya, from Qasim Shah, who wrote in saying, would Iraq be better off if it declared itself a non-religious secular state?
The answer is that secularism, in terms of a public rejection of any religious affinity or identity, is really not acceptable to the majority of the Iraqi people. The majority of the Iraqi people are Muslims, and they are proud to be Muslims. Unfortunately, they express their Islam in sectarian ways, which have caused a great deal of divisions and tensions. But to have a state that is based on a rejection of religious principles or a rejection of the religion of Islam is really not possible in the context of Iraq's political culture. But that's a long way from saying that we should allow religious groups or religious authorities to intervene directly in the political process in Iraq. And to be fair, the major religious, especially the Shia religious establishment, has been playing a very, very constructive role in stabilizing the country and has refused to be involved in the direct management, as it were, of public affairs the way it was in Iran. So the fact whether Iraq is a secular state or not is really immaterial, I think, to the strengthening and the deepening of its political maturity. I think it will happen in time, that there will be a kind of reduction in the overt religiosity of society and the state. But to follow a kind of rigorous form of separation between mosque and state, as it were, may not be practical in the case of Iraq, and at least in the near and medium term.
Now, so we have about a minute left now. I wonder, I know you're a senior visiting fellow at Princeton University right now, but you've held some fairly senior posts in Iraq. I wonder, do you have any particular interest in becoming more active in what's going on there now, politically?
Well, I mean, I went back just after the elections to on a private visit, also to see how the political dialogue is evolving. I'm not really involved at the present moment in the political infighting, as it were, but there's no way that I will be able to disassociate myself from the political life of the country, and I hope at some point that I'll be able to contribute to the political future of the country, if not directly, certainly through writing, through lecturing, and through giving advice, which is what I've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years.
Well, Dr. Alawi, I thank you for coming back and discussing the current situation in Iraq with us. I appreciate you joining us on the show.
Thank you very much, Riz. Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow our program on Twitter. We'll keep you notified on upcoming shows, and you can send us questions and comments to pose to our guests. On the next show, Myanmar's military government says it will hold elections but has not announced a date. Meanwhile, the main opposition party, led by Nobel Peace Laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, has disbanded. Should the world community engage with Myanmar's regime or isolate it further? Send us your thoughts and tune in for that. Until next time, from me and the team, goodbye.